Vincent stood on the creaking floorboards of his one-room apartment, staring at the pile of unopened bills stacked on his rickety kitchen table. The overhead light flickered with an inconsistent hum, as though even the electricity in the building was unsure whether to stay or leave. Outside, a single car passed, splashing through puddles on the uneven street. He had arrived in this cramped part of town, hoping his painting career would flourish. But each day brought new obstacles. Money was running short, and his artistic dreams felt increasingly distant. He ran a hand through his dark, unkempt hair and tried to focus on the local newspaper spread out before him. Most classifieds required far more experience than he had, or offered pay so low it might as well have been volunteer work. Then his eyes caught on a small ad placed in a distant corner of the page. It read, "Life model wanted for portrait sessions. Generous compensation. Inquire at 221 Willow Lane. Ask for Madame Dubois." A phone number was scribbled beneath. A life model, he thought. He had once posed for a friend's figure drawing practice in art school, though it was never a formal job. At that moment, any possibility of earning money felt like a godsend. His meager savings were almost gone. Perhaps this was better than nothing. Taking a deep breath, he dialed the number listed. After several rings, a warm, slightly accented voice answered. "Madame Dubois speaking. How may I help you?" Her tone was rich with a confidence that suggested she was used to dealing with uncertain callers. Vincent cleared his throat. "Yes, hello, I'm calling about the life model position. Is the job still available?" "It certainly is," the voice purred. "Are you available to start soon?" He hesitated. "I can start whenever you need me." "Excellent. Come by my studio tomorrow afternoon around 2. I'll be waiting." She gave him the address, and they said their goodbyes. Vincent hung up, feeling a swell of relief at finding something to pay the bills, at least for now. Yet a note of uncertainty lingered. He had never heard of Madame Dubois, but there was only so much risk in posing for an artist. How bad could it be? The next day, Vincent walked the 15 blocks to Willow Lane, saving what little cash he had for groceries. The neighborhood looked slightly more upscale than his, lined with houses that had once been stately mansions in decades past. Though some showed peeling paint and overgrown gardens, they remained grand, with tall windows and broad steps leading up to elaborate doors. Number 221 loomed at the end of the street, a pale green house with cracked columns and stained glass windows. A dark wooden door, decorated with a brass knocker shaped like a lion's head, greeted him at the front. Nervously, he lifted the knocker and let it fall. A moment later, the door opened to reveal a petite woman, perhaps in her late 50s, though her bearing made it difficult to guess her exact age. She had short, silver hair arranged in chic waves. A bright silk scarf of swirling colors adorned her neck, and her eyes sparkled behind green-rimmed glasses. "Vincent, I presume?" she asked, pronouncing his name with a certain flourish. "I am Madame Dubois. Delighted you're here. Come inside." He followed her into a foyer where the walls were lined with portraits, many featuring individuals in a variety of intriguing attires. Some in conventional garments, others in flowing robes, still others in clothing that blurred distinctions in unexpected ways. The strokes were bold, the colors vibrant. Vincent couldn't help but be impressed. "This is your work?" he asked, pausing in front of a portrait of a tall individual with strong features, wearing a half-mask of elaborate gold and black. "It is," she said, smiling over her shoulder. "I specialize in portraits that explore hidden facets. I've spent many years perfecting the technique of capturing the elements people keep locked inside. Though it can be challenging, it's always thrilling." Vincent nodded. A small thrill of admiration rose in him. "I didn't realize you specialized in that sort of perspective." "Not many do," she said. and continued walking. "Come along to the studio." They passed through a narrow hallway and emerged into a large room at the back of the house. Floor-to-ceiling windows allowed light to cascade inside, illuminating a half-finished painting on an easel. The space smelled faintly of turpentine and oil paint. Several wooden stools and chairs stood here and there, next to shelves laden with brushes, palettes, and glass jars. The center of the room was mostly empty, containing only a vintage fainting couch upholstered in plush velvet. "Please put your things down," Madame Dubois instructed, gesturing toward a coat rack. "Then we'll discuss the terms." Vincent nodded and slipped off his worn jacket. He noticed a large mirror propped against one wall. It caught a reflection of him standing in that wide space, shoulders tense, posture uncertain. "Now," Madame Dubois said, walking to a small table, "I pay a flat rate per session, plus a bit extra if I request specific costuming. Is that acceptable to you?" She named a sum for the base rate that made Vincent's heart skip. It wasn't enough to become wealthy, but it would cover rent and bills with a bit left over for food. "Yes, that's fine," he said, trying to stifle a smile of relief. "How many sessions do you think you'll need?" "Potentially several," she replied. "I have an idea for a series of paintings that require a single model who can portray more than one aspect of being, or, as I like to say, who can shift easily into different roles." Vincent blinked. "Different roles?" She observed him calmly. "Do you have any objection to wearing clothing that may not be part of your usual wardrobe?" He tried to think of how to respond politely. "I'm not sure I follow." Madame Dubois moved past him to a tall wooden wardrobe in the corner of the studio. She opened it to reveal a variety of garments: elegant dresses, silk robes, skirts, sleek jackets, blouses with delicate embroidery, and more. Everything hung neatly, arranged by color and texture. "For certain paintings," she explained, "I prefer to emphasize a figure's capacity to embody something beyond what society normally assigns. That can involve cross-dressing. I mention it now so there are no misunderstandings later." Vincent stood quietly for a moment. He had never worn anything like that before. The closest he'd come was a joke in college where he put on a friend's scarf and hat, and that had only been for a quick laugh. Still, the pay. He glanced at the wardrobe again, eyeing the fine fabrics and imagining all the bills stacked on his table back home. "I can do that," he said slowly, "if you need me to." Her face lit up in a pleased smile. "Wonderful. We'll start with a simpler portrait today. No unusual garments. Just you as you are. Then, tomorrow, we'll move on to the second stage. I'll let you know what to wear." "Sure," he said, bracing himself internally for whatever second stage meant. Madame Dubois pointed to a worn screen in the corner of the room where he could change. "If you have comfortable clothes under your shirt, please strip to that. We'll start with a half-length portrait. Do whatever helps you feel relaxed." He went behind the screen, heart hammering in his chest. Stripping in front of a stranger wasn't something he did often, but there was no time for second-guessing now. He removed his shirt and pants until he was in a pair of form-fitting boxer briefs and a tank top, then stepped out, feeling the cool air of the studio on his skin. Madame Dubois had set up her easel. She looked at him with the same evaluating gaze he had seen in her portraits. "Good," she said. "Now take a seat on that stool near the window. Tilt your head a bit to the left. Yes, just so." He followed her directions as she studied him. Though the session lasted close to 2 hours, it passed faster than he expected. She was direct, but never overbearing, guiding him to shift an arm, lift a chin, or rest his hand against his collarbone. Her gentle directions, combined with her focus, made him forget his self-consciousness. By the time she asked him to relax, the sun had moved noticeably across the sky. She set her brush down. "That's enough for today. I have what I need for the base outline. We'll continue tomorrow, same time, if that works for you." Vincent exhaled, shoulders dropping with relief. "That works." "Excellent." She reached into a tidy little box on a side table, produced a small envelope, and handed it to him. "Your payment for today." He peeked inside, trying not to look too eager, but what he saw confirmed the figure she had promised. This was more money than he had earned in a single day in a long time. "Thank you," he said, voice nearly catching in his throat. "Be sure to get some rest," Madame Dubois said, her voice gentle. "Tomorrow will be more involved. For our next session, be prepared to experiment." He wasn't sure what she meant, but he nodded, gathered his clothes, and returned to his cramped apartment with a mixture of excitement and unease swirling in his mind. The next day, he arrived at her studio promptly at 2. Once again, Madame Dubois greeted him at the door. She led him straight to the wardrobe in the corner. "For this piece," she began, "I want to create a pair of portraits, one of you as you usually present, and another with a different energy. I find it best to avoid labels that can stifle creativity, but if we must name it, let's call your alternate self Violet." Vincent felt his stomach tighten. "Violet?" he repeated. Madame Dubois nodded. "Yes, it's a name that conveys color, a blending of shades. It fits the vision." She selected a long, flowing skirt of soft material, colored in gentle pastels. She placed it over a wooden chair. Then she lifted a matching blouse, an elegant button-down style made of thin, shimmering fabric. It was cut to flatter a form different from Vincent's, yet it didn't appear extremely tight. "You'll wear these for our session." Vincent stared at the garments. He'd known this might be part of the job, but now that the reality lay in front of him, he could feel each beat of his pulse. "I see," he said quietly. Madame Dubois rested a reassuring hand on his arm. "You can change behind the screen. Take your time. And don't worry, this is purely for art. The goal here is to reflect certain qualities that everyone holds. Relax. I assure you, you'll look wonderful as Violet." With a hesitant nod, Vincent retreated behind the screen. He removed his shirt and pants, then slipped on the blouse. It felt foreign against his skin, smooth, airy. The skirt slid over his narrow hips, a sensation he had never experienced before. On a small table behind the screen, he found a pair of ballet flats that were slightly snug but not uncomfortable. He looked at himself in the mirror that stood in the corner. The reflection was jarring. A young man with dark hair and clothes typically associated with a different wardrobe aisle. He felt a curious swirl of embarrassment and intrigue. Yet the money was good, and something about stepping into a new form was oddly mesmerizing. Madame Dubois called from beyond the screen. "No rush, Vincent. Let me know when you're ready." Vincent swallowed and stepped out. Her eyes swept over him with genuine appreciation, not judgment. "Yes," she murmured. "Yes, that is perfect. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like you to sit on the couch and fold one leg under you, as if you're lost in thought." He did as instructed. The moment he settled into position, Madame Dubois began to paint, brush moving swiftly across the canvas. Every so often she glanced up, and her gaze traveled from head to toe. Occasionally she would ask him to tilt his chin or soften the line of his mouth. He discovered an unexpected calm as he posed. Something in the outfit, in the unfamiliar drape of the fabric, made him hyper-aware of every shift in his body. He found himself considering how he sat, how he crossed his ankles, how he let his hands rest in his lap. It was strange, yet in that strangeness came a faint sense of wonder. Madame Dubois spoke quietly while she worked. "When you were a child, did you ever imagine yourself in a world different from the one you knew? Perhaps in your drawings?" Vincent thought back to the sketches he used to make, the ones he'd hidden in old notebooks. "I drew castles, forests, creatures that didn't exist," he confessed. "It was my way of escaping." She smiled softly. "We all have an instinct for going beyond boundaries now and then." She paused to mix colors on her palette. "You must let yourself approach each new experience with curiosity rather than shame." He wasn't sure how to answer, so he merely nodded. The session lasted much longer than the previous days. When Madame Dubois finally stepped back from the easel, the shadows in the studio had lengthened into long stripes on the floor. She clapped her hands together. "That's enough for now. You can change back." Vincent stood, the skirt swishing around his legs, then disappeared behind the screen to swap the garments for his everyday clothes. Once dressed, he saw that she had laid another envelope on the side table. He picked it up, noticing it felt heavier than the first day's payment. "Thank you," he said softly. "Are we continuing tomorrow as well?" "Absolutely," she replied. "But let's rest for a day. Come back in 2 days, same time. I have more ideas to explore." He nodded, feeling an undercurrent of relief and anticipation. "Sure. See you then." The next morning, after paying his bills, Vincent had enough money left to buy fresh groceries for the first time in weeks. He picked up vegetables and fruit that he could actually enjoy rather than the usual discount canned goods. It felt good to walk home with a bag that wasn't just full of ramen. He cooked a simple meal of sautéed vegetables and rice and settled down to think through his next session with Madame Dubois. He also caught glimpses of himself in the mirror. Even in his casual t-shirt and jeans, he couldn't shake the memory of how it felt to wear the soft fabrics in her studio. He could still recall the swirl of the pastel skirt around his ankles, the gentle press of ballet flats on his feet. A small part of him felt unsettled that it had stirred such complicated emotions. However, the money was real, and Madame Dubois was kind. That was enough reason to return. 2 days later, Vincent found himself once again in the airy studio on Willow Lane. Madame Dubois instructed him to sit at a small vanity table she had placed near one of the windows. "Today," she said, "we'll go a bit further. I want to introduce some subtle cosmetics." He raised an eyebrow. "Cosmetics?" She nodded. "Nothing dramatic, but enough to highlight certain angles in your face. This is for the next phase of the portrait. Think of it as accentuating shadows and light in much the same way we do with paint on canvas." He glanced down at the small case of powders and brushes she had set out. Some part of him recoiled at the unfamiliar routine, but he thought about the consistent payments. "Okay," he agreed, with a trace of hesitation in his voice. "I'll try." Madame Dubois gave him a short tutorial on how to apply a faint layer of foundation, a light hint of color on his cheeks, and a neutral tone on his lips. Vincent was surprised by how small changes could alter his appearance. His face, normally somewhat sharp, softened in the reflection. When he finished, Madame Dubois offered an approving smile. "Lovely," she said. "Now for the attire." Today, she had chosen a flowing satin gown in a subdued shade that glimmered in the late afternoon light. The gown was sleeveless, but came with a matching shrug that draped over the shoulders. Vincent slipped behind the screen and changed. His nerves felt more pronounced this time. Yet once fully dressed, he inhaled and stepped out. She directed him to the fainting couch again, but this time she had rearranged the room. Ornate curtains served as a backdrop, glowing from the sunlight beyond. Madame Dubois had even set a few mirrors around the edges so that Vincent's reflection appeared in multiple angles. The painting process began. At first, Vincent felt awkward. Though the cosmetics and gown were not overtly theatrical, they were still different enough to make him acutely aware of his posture, the curve of his waist, and the position of his arms. Madame Dubois encouraged him to relax. to sink into the cushions with a grace he might not normally display. "Let your body speak," she said. "Imagine you are drifting on a dream, unconcerned with how others perceive you. Focus on the interplay of color, shape, and emotion." He did his best to follow her guidance, letting the environment wash over him. The rhythmic brush strokes of her painting were almost hypnotic. Occasionally she would walk up to him, lightly adjust the tilt of his chin or the angle of his arm, then return to the easel. In the quiet hush of that studio, the faint sounds of paint against canvas and her even breathing felt almost sacred. Vincent's gaze fell on one of the mirrors. In it, he saw a version of himself that could have stepped out of a dream, hair still in its natural style, but set against soft, feminine clothing and a delicate glow on his skin. He tried to identify exactly what he felt. Part of him resisted acknowledging it. Another part of him found it oddly beautiful. There was a raw sense of possibility there, as though he was glimpsing an untold story. Madame Dubois caught him staring at the reflection. "Do you see something surprising?" she asked gently. He swallowed. "I just didn't realize it could look like this." She nodded, as if she understood. Our world often places us in boxes that are not always ours to occupy. Sometimes, slipping into a new role can spark a deeper understanding of ourselves. Vincent pressed his lips together. "You say that like you know how it feels." She gave a mysterious little smile. "I have lived many years. I've witnessed countless transformations, on and off the canvas. There's always more than one way to see ourselves." He didn't know how to answer, so he simply resumed the pose, letting the fleeting emotions remain unsaid. By the end of the session, he felt surprisingly at ease in the gown, as if it had become a costume in a performance, and he was learning the part. When Madame Dubois finally called it a day, Vincent stood up, changed, and once again found an envelope waiting for him. This had become their little ritual. He thanked her quietly, and she informed him of the next session's date. That night, Vincent lay in his apartment, staring at the chipped ceiling. He had paid his rent, bought enough food, and even set aside a portion for emergencies. Yet his mind refused to rest. The memory of the pastel skirt, the elegant gown, the reflection in the mirrors, these lingered like faint brushstrokes that hadn't dried. For the first time, he realized how much he yearned to see how the paintings turned out, to witness what Madame Dubois had coaxed onto the canvas. He wondered if her skill would reveal something he couldn't put into words. He found himself sketching, well past midnight, trying to capture some echo of what he had felt in the studio. His pencil created lines that wavered between masculine and feminine silhouettes, and each time he tried to separate them, the two images blurred together. Finally, he set his pencil down and massaged his temples. There was something intangible under the surface, but for now, all he could do was wait for their next session. He returned 2 days later, his heart lighter knowing rent was no longer an immediate worry. He knocked on the familiar door, and Madame Dubois greeted him with a broad smile. "Come in," she beckoned, stepping aside for him to enter the light-saturated foyer. They proceeded to the studio, where the paintings of him, one in casual attire, another in the pastel skirt, another in the satin gown, stood at various stages of completion. Vincent felt a surge of awe. Even half-finished, they radiated an emotional quality that made his pulse quicken. In each work, there was a unique sense of presence. It was not just a matter of wearing different clothes. Something about his expression and posture shifted, and Madame Dubois had captured it flawlessly. "These look incredible," he said softly. She studied him over the rim of her glasses. "They are not yet finished, but I'm delighted you like them so far. Now, we have more ground to cover. I hope you're feeling adventurous today." He gave a small, uncertain laugh. "I'll do my best." This time, the outfit chosen was a bit more elaborate. The blouse featured delicate lace trim, and the skirt was paired with stockings that brushed warmly against his legs. He was also provided with a corset-like undergarment, more for shape than strict form. Vincent hesitated, but as always, the memory of his landlord's warnings about overdue rent drove him to comply. He needed the steady pay, so once again, he slipped behind the screen, carefully dressing himself and trying to avoid tangling the laces. When he emerged, Madame Dubois gave him an approving nod. "Excellent. Now, if you're comfortable, I'd like you to stand at that pedestal in the corner near the tall mirror. I want to paint you from behind first, capturing your silhouette." He walked over to the spot, looking at his reflection in the tall mirror. The lace blouse clung softly to his torso, the skirt draped elegantly. Seeing himself from this new angle made him pause. His posture felt different, his breath shallower because of the corset. He tried to shift, but Madame Dubois held up a gentle hand. "Hold still. Observe your form as I do," she instructed. The painting commenced. Soft afternoon light spilled through the window, illuminating the lines of his figure. He became aware of every rib of the corset, every inch of lace, every swish of the skirt against his legs. Time passed oddly as he stood there, hearing only the whisper of the brush and the faint sound of distant traffic. Occasionally, Madame Dubois would hum to herself. Eventually, she asked him to turn around so she could paint his face. Her gaze was as intense as ever, analyzing every angle of his jaw, the subtle shape of his cheekbones, the curve of his lashes. Vincent felt a mixture of self-consciousness and curious excitement. In one sense, he felt laid bare, but in another, he was wrapped in artistry, in textures he had never worn before. When the session drew to a close, Madame Dubois stepped back, inspecting her work. "Very good," she declared. "Tomorrow I'd like to do a set of sketches, less formal than these painted portraits. We'll experiment with quick poses, capturing fleeting expressions, if you're up for it, that is." He nodded, his voice a bit hoarse. "Yes, of course, you're the boss." Madame Dubois chuckled softly. "I may be your employer, but the canvas is the real master of us both." Over the following weeks, Vincent found a rhythm in this unusual job. Each visit introduced something new, a different garment, a fresh approach to posture, or small touches like jewelry and a bit more makeup. Sometimes he would pose as an openly masculine figure, seated in a straightforward posture. Other times, he would become Violet again, adopting a softer carriage, sometimes even wearing a wig Madame Dubois provided. Long, dark hair that altered the frame of his face in the mirror. One afternoon, they spent hours on minimal clothing, a simple slip or robe, and the effect was not lurid, but rather gentle, almost ethereal. Madame Dubois painted with a kind of reverence, never pushing him to reveal more of himself physically than necessary. She wanted to capture a balance of lines, the interplay of angles, a hint of vulnerability that transcended definitions. During breaks, they would share tea in her cluttered kitchen, where the walls were pinned with sketches from her travels around the world. Vincent learned more about her life, how she had grown up in a family of artists, traveled through Europe in her youth, studying and painting wherever she could. She had an uncanny ability to read people, picking up on subtle hints in their mannerisms. Vincent suspected that this insight fueled the emotional depths of her portraits. It was during these breaks that he began to open up about his own struggles, his wish to be a recognized artist, his financial hardships, and the complexities he felt each time he wore those garments. He never quite found the perfect words, but Madame Dubois seemed to understand without him needing to explain in detail. She listened without judgment, offering him quiet empathy. One day, Near the end of their scheduled sessions, Madame Dubois announced she had enough reference material to complete a series of paintings. She invited Vincent to preview her progress. The canvases lined the studio walls in an unbroken sequence. He saw himself in a variety of poses, some fully masculine, wearing casual attire with a confident tilt of his shoulders. Others captured him as Violet, draped in fine gowns or delicate fabrics, reflecting a softer poise. A few blurred the lines entirely, showing a blend in posture and style. The overall effect was a story told in images, a shifting perspective on a single individual. Vincent felt chills. He had never seen himself like this, and the realization that the same person occupied each painting was almost disorienting. "It's stunning," he whispered. Madame Dubois stood behind him, arms crossed, her expression warm. "I'm glad you think so. I've poured my heart into these works, but they wouldn't have been possible without your willingness to reveal another dimension of yourself." He turned to her. "I only did it for the money at first." He almost laughed at how that sounded. But along the way, something changed. He hesitated, rummaging for the right words. "It's strange to see how much the clothing and poses can alter the way I look, how I move, even the way I feel sometimes." She reached out, touched his shoulder. "You've done more than just wear garments. You've managed to embody a breadth of expression. That's no small feat." He lowered his head. "I guess so." She stepped forward, selecting a small painting that was nearly complete. It showed him, short-haired, no wig, wearing a blouse with delicate sleeves but paired with jeans, standing with his hands loosely on his hips. The stance exuded confidence, yet it hinted at fragility, as if neither purely masculine nor purely feminine lines defined him. "I want you to have this one," she said. "Consider it a gift." Vincent's eyes widened. "Are you sure? You could sell it." She offered a kind smile. "There will be other pieces for sale, but this particular painting speaks to a moment of real transformation. I think it belongs with you." He thanked her softly, not fully grasping how to express the swirl of emotion in his chest. He stood there for a moment longer, letting the sight of his portraits fill him with thoughts that might take him a long time to unravel. Not long after, the final portrait session arrived. Madame Dubois greeted him with a sense of ceremony. "Today is our last day of painting. After this, I'll only need time to finalize details. I've arranged a special outfit that represents both sides of the journey we've taken." Vincent raised his eyebrows. "Both sides?" She nodded. "Yes, a merging of your everyday attire and something reminiscent of Violet's flair. Consider it a culminating statement." Behind the screen, Vincent discovered neatly folded jeans, stylish, dark denim, and a flowing blouse that, while cut in a similar shape to some of the more feminine pieces he had worn, was designed in a neutral hue. It had subtle accents, but was not overtly lacy or ruffled. A matching belt rested on top, featuring a slender, polished buckle. And instead of the ballet flats, there was a pair of simple black boots. It was an ensemble that mingled different vibes, melding into an elegant but understated aesthetic. He dressed carefully, noticing how the blouse draped across his shoulders, how the jeans fit snug around his legs. Stepping out, he felt oddly self-assured, as if the outfit had been tailored just for him. Madame Dubois beamed. "You see?" she said, guiding him toward the center of the room, where a single chair awaited. "Sometimes it's the subtle touches that capture the richest parts of us. Take a seat. Let your hands rest on your thighs." He did as told. She began to paint with a fervor he hadn't seen before, brush dancing across the canvas in bold, decisive strokes. Vincent let his mind wander, remembering all the times he had come here. The day he wore the pastel skirt, the satin gown, the corset, the subtle makeup. Each session had chipped away at his preconceived notions, leaving something new in its wake. When she finally finished, she placed the brush aside. "I believe that completes our series," she announced, stepping away from the easel. "Come, have a look." Vincent approached slowly. The painting on the easel captured him in the cross of a warm beam of light, wearing that hybrid outfit. His eyes, as painted, held layers of feeling, the brush strokes around the cheekbones revealing quiet strength. The clothes seemed to meld different styles seamlessly, bridging all the earlier incarnations from the previous sessions. A swirl of color in the background hinted at swirling possibilities. Madame Dubois rested a hand on his shoulder. "This piece is special. It's the final note to the collection. I hope you see something meaningful in it." He gazed at it, lingering on the lines that formed his face. "I do," he said quietly, though he struggled to articulate precisely what. "Thank you." She nodded, her eyes bright with satisfaction. "You're very welcome. I'll take care of varnishing and framing them. After that, I'll arrange a small exhibition in a local gallery." Vincent glanced at her. "You'll be showing all of them? Even the ones where I'm in gowns?" "Yes, if you're comfortable with that," she answered gently. "I promised I would never display them without your permission, but I do think these works could resonate with many viewers. They speak of fluid possibilities." For a moment, Vincent hesitated. The idea of people seeing him dressed in those garments felt daunting. Yet he recalled how he had worried about rent, how he had discovered an unexpected perspective along the way. "If you believe these paintings might inspire or move people, then all right, show them." She offered a soft smile. "Good. I'm proud of you." In the days that followed, Vincent found himself busier than ever. He started painting again, his own artwork, which he had neglected during his financial struggles. He rented a small corner of his friend's studio downtown, setting up his easel with renewed energy. The money he'd earned from modeling gave him room to breathe, and the entire experience had sparked new creativity. His brushstrokes were freer, more expressive, as though he had tapped into a reservoir of possibility. A few weeks later, Madame Dubois invited him to the private opening of her exhibition. The gallery was modest but well lit, its white walls providing a sleek backdrop for each painting. Attendees in chic, modern outfits mingled, sipping wine and discussing the artworks. Vincent noticed the sequence of his portraits arranged along one wall in chronological order, from the first, where he wore only his tank top, to those featuring him in pastel skirts, satin gowns, and eventually that final merging outfit. The display had small placards with cryptic titles like Glimmer, Expansion, and Still Water. At the far end hung the painting Madame Dubois had given him. A small note read, "Gift to the model, not for sale." He felt a little self-conscious with so many eyes scanning the paintings, but he also felt a pride he hadn't expected. People pointed, murmured about the transition from painting to painting. He overheard bits of praise for the bold concept, and he caught the occasional whispered surprise at the same person adopting such varied expressions. Some viewers seemed taken by the possibility that a single subject could contain so many facets. Madame Dubois approached him, holding 2 glasses of wine. "How does it feel to see yourself on the wall like this?" He took a glass and sipped, trying to quell his nerves. "It's surreal, but it's incredible. I never imagined I'd be the subject of an entire collection." Her gaze took in the paintings. "You've been open to exploration, and that can be more challenging than it sounds. Without that openness, none of this would exist." He nodded, eyes drifting from canvas to canvas. "I'm starting to see that, yes." They wandered through the gallery, chatting with people who admired the works. Several asked Vincent about his experience, though he kept his responses brief. For him, it had been complex, sometimes disorienting, but ultimately a chance for new perspectives. He was still sorting out much of what he had felt. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned, Vincent found himself standing before the final painting. He marveled at how Madame Dubois had caught that quiet moment of reflection, the way light fell across his face. The painting seemed to speak of a simple truth, that each person holds layers waiting to be discovered, no matter how deeply they've been tucked away. Madame Dubois appeared at his side. "I'll have to ship some of these paintings to another gallery soon," she said. "But I can keep one or two on permanent display here." He glanced at her, considering. "What about the painting titled Still Water, the one where I'm wearing the gown? I think that's one of the most striking pieces in the series." She smiled softly. "I'd thought so too. Shall I keep that one here?" He nodded. "Yes, something about it needs to be seen." They stood there for a while, quiet. The hush of the gallery surrounded them like a gentle cloak, and for a moment Vincent simply breathed, letting the evening's impressions settle. Weeks passed. Vincent continued his own painting, now with a sense of confidence he had never experienced before. He reflected on each modeling session and how it had broadened his creative instincts. The lines he drew on his own canvases held a new fluidity, an openness that mirrored what he had experienced in Madame Dubois's studio. Though the struggle for daily life persisted, he still had bills, rent, and the occasional worry about where his next meal ticket might come from. He felt far less trapped than before. He also found himself more aware of fashion and style. On a few occasions, he picked out pieces of clothing that had softer fabric or more flowing lines, combining them with his usual jeans and jackets. He remembered the sense of refined grace he'd felt in certain garments, and though wearing them outside the studio felt daunting, he let small details seep into his everyday life. One afternoon, he visited Madame Dubois at her house to see how she was faring. He found her in the midst of preparing new canvases for a different project. She led him to a back room where she'd stored the completed paintings of him, awaiting shipment to their next exhibition destination. He gazed at the rows of his own likeness in varying degrees of transformation. "I'm going to miss these once they're gone," Madame Dubois said, placing a hand on one of the frames. Vincent ran a finger along the edge of another painting. "They changed me in ways I didn't expect," he admitted quietly. She lifted her eyes to him. "Art can do that, especially when you're both the subject and, in your own way, a collaborator." They walked past each framed painting, letting memories float between them. Each piece was a milestone of sorts, a glimpse into what he had experienced under her skilled brush. Eventually they reached the exit, and Vincent sighed, taking in the studio one last time. "This place became like a second home," he said. "Thank you for everything." She gave him a small smile. "I should be the one thanking you. Without you, this entire series wouldn't exist. Besides, your own spirit shines through these canvases. Don't underestimate the part you played." He nodded, feeling a quiet warmth in that acknowledgement. With a final exchange of goodbyes, he stepped outside, letting the sun's rays wash over his face. He walked away from Willow Lane, hearing the echo of her words in his mind. He had come here desperate for money, ready to do almost anything to avoid losing what little stability he had. Through a series of paintings and the gentle guidance of an eccentric, insightful painter, he had stumbled onto perspectives that startled him and gave him a newfound sense of freedom. On an evening a few months later, Vincent found himself standing at his easel in his friend's studio, finishing the last details of a painting of his own. This piece depicted a figure standing on a shoreline, one foot in the water and the other in the sand, the horizon a brilliant blend of colors. He had put elements of androgynous style into the figure, hinting at a broader sense of humanity in the posture. The figure's gaze was turned toward the sky, uncertain yet yearning. He set down his brush, stepping back to assess his work. Though it was still incomplete, He felt the pulse of something alive within the scene. He suspected it might end up being one of his best yet. He realized that the old fear he used to carry, the fear of not being able to afford the next day, was no longer strangling his creativity. He might still face challenges, but at least he had found a spark that kept him painting with vigor. His phone vibrated, and he glanced at the screen. It was a text from Madame Dubois. "A gallery in the city has inquired about the series. Likely an excellent opportunity. Let's celebrate soon." He smiled. There was a sense of quiet triumph in knowing the work they had done together was moving out into the world, possibly to spark recognition in others. He grabbed a rag and gently wiped stray paint from his fingers. Then, in the reflective surface of the studio window, he caught his own reflection. He was wearing simple jeans and a comfortable shirt, yet around his neck was a silken scarf with a subtle floral pattern. It was a small piece of flair he had never worn before meeting Madame Dubois, but it felt natural now. He gazed at that reflection for a moment. A wave of emotion stirred within him. He remembered the day he first walked into Madame Dubois's house, worried about how bizarre this job might be. He remembered each garment, each session, each conversation. In his mind, he saw the swirl of paint, the hush of that lofty studio, the softness of the outfits. He saw the final painting, where different aspects of himself had merged in one captured instant of light and color. And he simply breathed, letting the realization settle that he was still the same person he had always been, just with more angles to explore. Though the challenges of everyday life would remain, a new dimension had opened inside him, and he could feel it rising through his art. Perhaps he didn't need to define it. Perhaps it was enough to simply know it was there, waiting for him whenever he picked up his brush or slipped on a garment that felt a bit out of the ordinary. He let out a soft chuckle, tidied his supplies, and closed up the studio for the night. Outside, the city lights shimmered, and the air was thick with the promise of rain. Pulling his jacket tighter around his body, he strolled down the street, carrying within him the recollection of lace and satin, denim and boots, a swirl of pastel skirts and sleek corsets. Each memory belonged to him, part of a story that would continue to unfold one brushstroke at a time. Tomorrow he might return to Willow Lane for tea with Madame Dubois, or he might focus on finishing his shoreline painting. Whatever he chose, he knew he could do so without the weight that had once held him back. Somewhere, in galleries he had yet to visit, images of him, sometimes called Vincent, sometimes called Violet, were quietly teaching onlookers that people can hold layers they never expect. And he found he was ready for that world, in all its shades. He gave a final glance at the darkening sky, hearing the wind stir the trees. A soft smile curved his lips. Every step he took reminded him that he was free to create and to model, to blend bold lines and gentle curves however he saw fit. With the memory of satin against his skin and the echo of a paintbrush against canvas, he pressed on into the night, open to whatever awaited him ahead.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.